Hello, my name is Alissa Nicol. I'm a member of the Select Board. I'm here today with Dean Charter, Vice Chair of the Select Board and Chair of the DPW Building Committee. We'd like to discuss some additional details about the proposal to replace the DPW facility with you today. For this project to move forward, voters will need to pass a debt exclusion at the ballot on Tuesday, April 29th. Question 1 asks voters to exempt borrowing for a new DPW facility from the provisions of Proposition 2.5. This must pass by a simple majority. Next, the authorization to borrow $35.2 million for the project will be brought to town meeting on May 5th with Article 7. A 2/3 majority is required for the article to pass. Voters are learning that the Finance Committee and Select Board have conflicting positions, and we'd like to talk to you today about why. The Finance Committee has shared that their concerns are about the timing and the scope of the project, so we'll focus on those two issues. Dean, in your preview video for Article 7, you shared that a 2024 short-term goal of the Select Board is to bring the DPW facility project to town meeting in May of 2025. What is the history of board goals for this project?
Well, it goes back quite a few years. As early as 2020, this was identified as a goal for the Select Board to advance the DPW project. And a feasibility study was arranged at that point. The feasibility study was delivered, and in 2021, the Select Board established a feasibility study committee to examine the results of the study that was produced by Weston and Sampson. And the results of that was the feasibility study committee recommended to the Select Board, and the Select Board unanimously agreed to advance the project and bring it to town meeting for initial design funding for the 60% design. That was brought forward in 2023. I made the presentation at town meeting, and the funding for that, $1.22 million, was approved by a 77% majority to come up with an advanced design of the building.
So we've been aware of the need to replace the facility and discussing this for a number of years.
That's correct. It's been pretty obvious for everyone that the building is inadequate. It was built in 1969 for a much smaller town. It was built, frankly, on a shoestring budget. So it's never been a really adequate building in the last 30 or 40 years. So we figured that with getting a 60% design, we'd have a much more advanced idea of exactly what the project would look like. And we looked at a couple of possibilities during the feasibility study process. Could the building be renovated in some fashion? Could be expanded in some fashion? Could we construct two separate smaller facilities side by side? All of those were rejected due to cost, due to site constraints, and frankly due to the structural instability of the existing building. And the recommended option that we are still committed to is to total demolition of the existing building and construction of a new facility.
So the Finance Committee in 2023 at town meeting recommended the appropriation to advance the design of this new building. And as you mentioned, town meeting voters overwhelmingly agreed, approved spending with a 77% yes vote. Speaking of the Finance Committee's position on this design, a member of the Finance Committee offered one of the most important suggestions to lower the cost, and that was to eliminate the phased construction that was originally proposed to keep the operations on site while construction was taking place. And although this involves renting space for operations to move off-site while the project is completed, it shortens the timeline of construction and ultimately saves us money.
That's correct. Our original hope was not to have to move all of the operations, but it was going to extend the life of the project by at least another 6 to 12 months if we had done the phased construction. So we think it's a worthwhile effort to move everybody on a temporary basis into some other locations. We've identified a couple of possible locations to move folks to. The other thing about eliminating the phased construction was that by clearing off the entire site, we're able to adjust the actual location of the new building, which we think will provide better coverage and protection for the folks on Forest Road. It just fits into the site a whole lot better. So I think it's a win-win, and we're glad that the Finance Committee came up with this idea and pursued it very vigorously, frankly. And I think we'll end up with a much better project as a result of that.
So one suggestion I've heard is to shrink the size of the garage and store only the in-season vehicles indoors. Can you tell us why that won't work?
Well, what's happening now is that we tend to be using a lot of this heavy-duty equipment all seasons of the year. It used to be when the winters were much fiercer, you get deep frost in the ground, and a lot of the excavating equipment, you just park it for a period of 3 or 4 months because you're dealing with 48 inches of frost in the ground. That's not the situation now. What's happening is increasingly we're able to work year-round doing a lot of excavation work. So, because the ground is soft. We still have cold weather though. So when you leave excavators and other backhoes, other diesel-fired equipment outside in that cold weather, the fuel turns into a gel. And then it takes a prolonged period of time to get the equipment going again. We had a situation last winter where it took several mechanics an entire day just to get the rubber tire-mounted excavator operational. So that was really inefficient. So we're faced with that all the time. One of the other issues that's important for us for winter conditions is to make sure that any equipment that we might be storing de-icing chemicals in overnight be stored inside so that we don't have a situation with rain, snow, or sleet landing on top of those de-icing chemicals and caking them up before the truck is able to be deployed in these storm damage situations. Highway Department ends up responding 30 to 40 times per winter, going out for either snow or more frequently ice and black ice situations. So we really need to have as much equipment as possible undercover in a temperature controlled environment. By temperature controlled, what I mean is we'll attempt to keep the equipment garage to about 50 degrees, enough to protect the equipment, let things melt off the equipment, and be able to start the diesel engines easily to let them respond to icing situations quickly.
So in addition to keeping the vehicles ready to deploy, we've talked about the fact that storing the vehicles inside extends the life of the vehicles, this very expensive equipment. We are on a 24-year replacement schedule rather than the typical 17-year replacement schedule. You mentioned several reasons that the DPW facility is the most critical building need in your preview video this year. Non-compliance with modern building, fire, energy, ADA, health, safety, and stormwater codes and regulations. The Finance Committee still considers that constructing a building for only some of the staff, the desk staff, would suffice, and that the garage does not need replacement at this time.
Well, the problem with that is that, as people can easily see when they tour the building, and we have had some series of public tours of the building, the building, as I said earlier, was built on a shoestring budget. There is no structural steel frame for the building. What holds the building up is basically cement blocks cemented together, stacked one on top of another. The there's no insulation in the building. And the problem that we have with the building is that over the years, those concrete block walls have been deteriorating. If you stand inside the building on a sunny day and you look to the south, you can actually see daylight shining through those cement blocks. We've also had a situation over the years with the brine that's created from the snow meltwater and the remaining de-icing chemicals coming off the trucks, creating basically like a seawater situation. That goes over to the side of the building and gets wicked up by these blocks, and the blocks actually spall as a result of getting hit with the brine. So some of those cement blocks now are, one layer of them is only about a third of its designed capacity. We've had to parge epoxy on the inside of the building to hold the thing together, but it's just not in a structurally good situation. So if there was any kind of a seismic event, which admittedly are rare, but they do happen, we'd have some serious problems with the building. The other problem that we have is the building is so small compared to the amount of equipment that we're storing in it and how we have to park things. There have been some vehicle strikes on the inside of the building. It's very easy for somebody's wet foot to slip off a brake pedal and bump the side of the building. So that again has created some problems. So the result is that the whole building is just not in a great structural condition.
Let's talk about the tax impact on residents now. Part of our budgeting process this year was a decision to not use any of the untaxed levy that remains from the operating override last year, and ensuring that the tax increase would be lower than it has been for the past several years. And the tax impact for this project will not hit the tax bills until FY27. The Finance Committee has recommended no debt exclusion be brought to voters in the same year as an operating override, and not adding debt until old debt has rolled off.
Yes, that's correct. And we follow that guidance. The operating override was last year. This will be a debt exclusion override approved hopefully this year. We've held the total increase in spending for fiscal 26 to about 1.9%. So we've held those numbers down. Also, a lot of our existing debt has been rolling off. For instance, most of the school debt has been retired at this point on the junior high school and the high school. So we're actually in a pretty good situation for debt. The other issue that we have as far as looking at the timing of the project is that we know that construction costs will increase by about 5% a year. So the longer that you wait for this project, suddenly a $35 million project or a $38 million project turns into a $40 million project. Back in 2023, the presentation I made at town meeting projected that square footage costs for this building would be about $670 a square foot. We've worked vigorously to value engineer the building, and we're at about $700 a square foot, which we think is a reasonable price. It's within the range of similar projects. Just as a comparison point, the recently completed North Acton Fire Station, when you escalate the price, the square footage cost of that building, that was over $900 a square foot. So we think that we've got a good, economical, very efficient building planned.
So in 2023, town meeting voters knew that they were approving design funding for a building that would cost $35 million plus, and you presented that square footage cost to them at that time. Right now, I'm sure everyone has concerns about the current economic uncertainty, and the Finance Committee has mentioned a few key specific issues: not knowing what bond rate the town will receive, our plan to use the total balance in capital stabilization funds, and carrying only a 5% contingency they fear may not cover a potential rise in construction costs due to tariffs.
Right, but there's a couple of issues here. One is Acton does have a AAA bond rating. That's as good as any municipality can get. Our financial people have projected a very conservative rate of about 4.25% for a bond rate for the 30-year note. We'll probably do better than that when we actually go out into the bond market. Some of the other issues you have to think about dealing with uncertainty. Here we are in April, but this project will not end up going out. We will not be getting bids until probably late November. So there's 6 months time span when all sorts of things can happen with the economy. We don't know what's going to happen with tariffs. There's been concern about increase in steel prices. That would only occur if the steel is actually purchased from foreign sources, if there indeed is a tariff at that point. And that's just one small element of the building. It's a significant element, but not overwhelming. We think that the cost of the prefabricated sections of the building that would be out of steel and aluminum would be about $5 million. So that's out of a $35 million project. So it's significant, but not huge. The other thing that's going to happen is that we will have an additional estimate done in August. So we'll have a better idea of exactly what the bidding situation will be when the actual documents go out. So we think we'll get some good guidance at that point. And finally, it's a fixed bid price. So once we come up with a price on the project and we agree to it with the contractor, all the contractors have to be pre-qualified by DCAM, the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance on the state level. Once they come up with a firm price and we accept it, and they place a performance bond in place for 100% of the cost, which is also a state requirement, the town will be protected. The contractor will have to absorb all the risk. If we open the bids in late November, early December, and we realize that all of the bids are too high and there's no way that we can proceed, that's it. We just won't sign the contract. We won't have to incur any borrowing costs, and we'll have to regroup, frankly, and decide what we're going to do. Should the building be changed in scope, which we would not recommend? Will we have to go back to a subsequent town meeting to look for additional funding? Don't know that. That would also require going through the same process, a 2/3 vote at subsequent town meeting. But the best way to know exactly what this building is going to cost is to actually put it out to bid, which is what we're proposing to do.
So the suggestion that we could suddenly fall short of the needed funding is not an accurate assessment of our risk. Our architect also reports that we've seen no impact from steel tariffs that were imposed on March 14th and that the market is currently competitive. So we've covered the timing issue pretty thoroughly and addressed the years-long process of identifying a pressing need to replace this building, the risk of imposing a higher tax burden on residents if we wait, and the fact that the town is protected to a degree from current economic uncertainty through a contingency and a fixed bid process. Let's touch on the scope before we wrap up.
So, very early in the process, Weston Sampson, who did the feasibility study, looked at recommending a building of 52,000 square feet. During the design process, early on, we pared that back to 47,000 square feet. Now we're down to about 42,000 square feet. That is about as tight of a building as we would recommend. There's no point in creating a building that we know is going to be inadequate when we move into it. We're looking at a building with a lifespan of 50 to 75 years, minimum. So we really want to make sure that we've got this thing sized right. We've had a building committee that has pored over this. We've had the architects, the engineers, we've had all the DPW staff look at it to see exactly what they need, how everything's going to fit. We actually have keyed in every single piece of equipment that's going to go in there, and we actually have a parking spot reserved on the plans so that we know that everything will fit in there with just a very minimum amount of increased space. The other thing we've done is we've compared it with similar facilities in similar towns. And we've found that we're right about in what I'd call a sweet spot. We're not too big, we're not too small. We're pretty much in the average of what you need for this kind of a facility for other towns in Massachusetts and the close parts of New England.
Thank you, Dean. And thank you to viewers who have taken the time to learn more about this critical project. Debt exclusion borrowing is how municipalities fund projects like fire stations, schools, libraries, public safety facilities, and DPW buildings. The total borrowing amount of $35 million is large, overwhelming, but it is more palatable than the original estimated $47 million. At $275 a year for the average single-family home and $160 a year for the average condo, it is not an insignificant ask, but it is a necessary one that we present to voters.
Thank you, Alissa, for leading off this conversation, and a big thank you to all the voters. We need folks to support this project. The DPW operations are critical to the civic life of the town. It's how you manage to navigate through town in the midst of snowstorms and ice storms. It's how streets get cleared from things like tree storm damage. These folks are the people that maintain all of our public grounds. They maintain our stormwater infrastructure. They really need an efficient building to keep that work going. Really, DPW workers are first responders just like police and fire. In fact, in some situations, they're actually the first responders. So thank you to the voters for consideration, and hopefully we'll get a favorable result. Thank you.